Roronoa Zoro enters One Piece as a paradox. He is introduced tied to a cross, starving, broken, and refusing to die. All of this because he made a deal with a corrupt marine captain's son to save a little girl named Rika. This is the first thing Oda tells us about Zoro. Before the swords, before the bounties, there is a man who would rather die on principle than live having betrayed his word. That foundation never changes. Everything else is just the world. Learning what that kind of resolve actually looks like at full force. This man needs zero introduction, but I'm giving him one anyway. Zoro is the second member of the Straw Hat Pirates and the first to be recruited by Luffy. Before joining, he earned infamy across the East Blue as Pirate Hunter Zoro, a freelance bounty hunter feared for his three-sword style and his terrifying killing intent. But the bounty hunting was never who he was. It was merely a means to an end. A way to find strong opponents, sharpen his blade, and inch closer to the only dream that has ever mattered to him, becoming the world's greatest swordsman. To understand Zoro, though, you cannot start at Shellstown. You have to start in Shimotsuki Village, at the steps of a dojo, with a girl who could beat him 2001 times and still cry about the unfairness of the world. Zoro's origin is deceptively simple, which is precisely what makes him interesting. As a child, he trained obsessively at a dojo in Shimotsuki Village, driven by the raw desire to be the strongest. He was talented, strong enough to defeat most adults. But there was one person he could never beat, Kuina, the dojo master Koshiru's daughter. After 2,000 defeats, Zoro challenged her to a private duel with real swords. He lost again, his 2001st consecutive defeat. What happened next is the defining emotional moment of Zoro's entire character. He cried, furious with himself, and confessed his dream of becoming the world's greatest swordsman. But instead of celebrating her victory, Kuina broke down too. Her own father had told her that girls could never become true swordmasters, that her body would eventually betray her ambition. The girl who had beaten Zoro 2001 times did not believe in herself. And Zoro was furious, not just at losing anymore, but at her. He told her that her defeatism was an insult, that if he ever surpassed her, it would be because of his own skill, not because of her gender. They made a vow. One of them would become the world's greatest swordsman. The next day, Kuina fell down the stairs of the dojo, reportedly going to retrieve a sharpening stone for her sword, something she would not have needed had she and Zoro not escalated to real blades, and died. A lot of people, even myself, have criticized this as a simplistic backstory, compared to the tragedies of, say, Robin's or Sanji's childhoods. But that criticism misses the philosophical depth Oda embedded in Kuina's death. Consider the nature of her death. She did not fall to a stronger enemy. She was not defeated in battle. She was not murdered by a villain or destroyed by a corrupt system. She was killed by fate, by randomness, by the cruel indifference of an accident that had nothing to do with strength, ambition, or willpower. For a boy who had just spent 2001 fights telling himself that the only thing that matters is how hard you try, this was the most devastating lesson imaginable. The universe does not care about your resolve. This is the core of Zoro's entire philosophy, accepting the cruelty of fate, but never surrendering to it. If fate tries to take him, it will have to prove its strength. His death would not signify victory for fate, but a reflection of his own inadequacies at that moment. Until then, he will fight, challenge his limits, and assert that only he has the authority to determine how far he can go. Every single major Zoro moment in the series, from Barity to Thriller Bark, traces back to this foundational trauma. He is waging a philosophical war against the concept of meaningless death. Zoro's response to this trauma defines his entire trajectory. He went to Koshiru, the man whose beliefs about women had contributed to Kuina's despair, and asked for her sword. Koshiru gave him the Wado Ichimonji, one of the 21 great grade swords, forged by Koshiru's own father, the legendary Wano swordsmith Shimotsuki Kozaburo. Zoro took that sword and placed it between his teeth, developing the Santoryu that would become his signature. Two swords in his hands, Kuina's sword clenched in his jaw. The symbolism could not be more deliberate. This man literally holds her ambition between his teeth every time he fights. He has never stopped carrying her. The Wado Ichimonji is the one sword Zoro has never lost. Through every battle, including his catastrophic defeat by Mihawk at the Barity, where his other two swords shattered. It is the constant across every phase of his journey, the one blade that is truly his. If Wado Ichimonji breaks, in some way the promise breaks. Wado Ichimonji potentially becoming Zoro's first black blade carries such emotional weight. A black blade is forged through a swordsman's will over the course of countless battles. It is a weapon that has been permanently hardened by the spirit of its wielder. If Zoro turns Kuina's sword into a black blade, he would be doing something poetically perfect, making her dream literally indestructible. What deepens the emotional texture of Zoro's childhood even further is the revelation, confirmed by Oda in the SBS of Volume 105, that Zoro himself is a descendant of the Shimotsuki clan from Wano. The lineage is precise. Shimotsuki Kozaburo, The legendary swordsmith who forged both the Wado Ichimonji and Enma left Wano 55 years before the story's present timeline with a group of 25 people. Among them was Shimotsuki Furiko, the younger sister of Shimotsuki Ushimaru, a daimyo of Wano who died fighting Kaido. Furiko settled in East Blue and married a man named Roronoa Pinzoro. Their son, Roronoa Arashi, became Zoro's father. This means that Kuina and Zoro are distant relatives, both carrying Shimotsuki blood without ever knowing it. The dojo where Zoro trained was founded by Wano samurai. His sensei Koshiru carried Wano swordsmanship techniques passed down from his samurai father. The philosophy Zoro absorbed as a child, about the will of the sword, about what it means to cut and to protect, was Wano's philosophy, transmitted across an ocean by exiles who never forgot where they came from. This recontextualizes Zoro's entire arc in Wano. When he wielded Enma, the sword forged by the same man who forged Wado Ichimonji, his grandfather figure Kozaburo, he was reuniting with his own heritage. He was completing a circle that began before he was born. There is a quieter, subtler piece of Zoro's childhood that represents one of many Oda's greatest feats of long-form storytelling. At some point during training, a young Zoro asked Koshiru whether swordsmen truly existed, who could cut through anything, even steel. Koshiru confirmed it, then demonstrated something paradoxical. He took a piece of paper and swung his blade at it. The paper was uncut. He had chosen not to cut it. Koshiru explained, "A sword that cuts everything it touches is not a real sword. A true blade understands the will of the swordsman. It cuts only what its wielder wishes to cut, and protects what its wielder wishes to protect. A sword without restraint, one that injures indiscriminately, brings nothing but shame. The highest form of swordsmanship is absolute control." Zoro did not understand this as a child. He was too consumed with raw power and ambition, too angry at the world that had taken Kuina. Koshiru gave Zoro the answer to his deepest question years before Zoro was ready to hear it. The payoff comes hundreds of chapters later, in Alabasta, during the fight against Mr. One. Mr. One's devil fruit turned his entire body into steel. Zoro's swords could not cut him. He was being sliced apart, bleeding, losing. And in that moment, on the edge of death, he heard the world differently. He described it as hearing the breath of all things, the life force inside every object, the rhythm that separated what should be cut from what should not. He remembered Koshiru's words, picked up his sword, and the paper-thin difference between cutting nothing and cutting everything finally made sense. This was in some sense a philosophical breakthrough. There is a direct parallel between Koshiru's teaching and the concept of Ryo that Hyogoro teaches Luffy in Wano. He uses the exact same metaphor. A blade that can cut steel should also be able to not cut paper. Koshiru, a man born of Wano samurai, was teaching his students advanced haki philosophy, dressed in the language of swordsmanship. And Zoro, at age 7 or 8, was not ready for it. The seed Oda planted in East Blue did not bloom until Alabasta, did not get properly named until Wano, and may not reach its final form until the Black Blade transformation is revealed. Zoro's entire character is built on the philosophical scaffolding of Bushido, the moral code of the samurai, governing honor, loyalty, courage, integrity, and self-discipline. But what makes this layer of his character so brilliant is that Zoro never consciously chose to follow Bushido. He was never handed a manual. Nobody sat him down and said, "These are the 7 virtues. Live by them." He absorbed them through growing up in a dojo founded by Shimotsuki Kozaburo, through the strict discipline of Koshiru's teaching, through 2001 losses to a girl who embodied the warrior spirit more purely than anyone he'd ever met. Zoro lived the way of the warrior, blindly and instinctively, because it was the only framework the world ever gave him. This is exactly why Vivi's nickname, Mr. Bushido, lands with such thematic weight during Alabasta. On the surface, it is a light-hearted cultural misapplication from a sheltered princess who sees a swordsman and reaches for the closest samurai-adjacent label she can find. But on a deeper level, it is the first time the story explicitly names what Zoro is. He doesn't correct her. He doesn't reject the title. He barely even acknowledges it, because it is not a costume he puts on. It is something so deeply woven into his behavior that naming it feels redundant. Vivi saw it in minutes, and then Oda pays off this entire thread with devastating elegance in Wano. Zoro disguises himself as a ronin, a masterless samurai, and the irony is that the disguise is barely a disguise at all. He walks through Wano, a country of samurai, and he fits. He does not look out of place. He rescues Hiyori and Toko without knowing who they are, fights on behalf of people who cannot fight for themselves, and rages at the injustice of Ebisu Town. He never borrowed the samurai code. It was inherited, flowing through the same bloodline that forged Enma and produced the greatest swordsman in Wano's history. The first and most defining virtue of Bushido is gi, righteousness or moral rectitude. It is the principle that a warrior makes a full commitment to their decisions and never retreats from their obligations. Zoro does not half commit to anything. A promise once spoken becomes something closer to a blood oath. When he swears to become the world's greatest swordsman over Queena's grave, he is not expressing a preference or a career goal. He is binding his existence to that ambition. Every training session, every battle, every scar that follows is a payment on that promise. When he pledges his loyalty to Luffy, first reluctantly at the Marine base, then with his full heart after witnessing Luffy's character, that loyalty becomes total, not conditional, not negotiable. Total to the point where Zoro is willing to sacrifice the very dream he promised Quina he would achieve if it means protecting the man he chose to follow. This is the beauty of Thriller Bark. Zoro does not merely offer his life to Kuma, he offers his dream, the world's greatest swordsman title, the promise to Quina, everything he has bled and starved and trained for. Because his commitment to Luffy is equally absolute. He does not rank his promises. He holds them all with the same iron grip and trusts that his willpower is strong enough to fulfill every single one. And when the pain from Luffy's accumulated injuries is transferred into his body and nearly kills him, he does not tell a soul. He stands in a pool of his own blood and says, "Nothing happened." That is Gi, not the flashy performative kind, the quiet self-destructive kind that costs everything and asks for nothing in return. The second virtue, you, or heroic courage, is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act in spite of it. For Zoro, this virtue crystallized in one of the most iconic scenes in One Piece, his first duel with Dracula Mihawk at the Barati. Zoro challenges the world's greatest swordsman knowing he will lose. He knows it rationally. He can feel the gap in their power the moment Mihawk deflects his three sword techniques with a pocket knife, a blade no bigger than a butter knife. Any rational person would reassess. Any sane swordsman would retreat and come back stronger. But Zoro is not operating on rationality. He is operating on Gi and Yu in tandem. The commitment to his dream demands that he face the strongest swordsman alive, and the courage of his convictions demands that he never turn his back. When Mihawk stabs him through the chest and asks, "Why won't you retreat?" Zoro's answer defines everything he will ever be. "If I were to take even one step back, I believe all those important oaths, promises, and many other deals until now would all go to waste, and I'll never be able to return before you again." He would rather die here, now, facing forward. After his swords are shattered and he is utterly defeated, Zoro sheaths his last blade, opens his arms wide, and turns his chest toward Mihawk's black blade. Scars on the back are a swordsman's shame. It is a worldview compressed into a single sentence. Zoro is telling Mihawk that cowardice is a fate worse than death, that a warrior who flees carries a wound no medicine can heal. And Mihawk understands. He respects it so deeply that he switches from the pocket knife to Yoru, his supreme grade blade, and delivers the finishing blow with honor. A diagonal slash across Zoro's chest that becomes the scar Zoro wears with pride from then on. This principle resurfaces again and again. On the rooftop of Onigashima, Zoro faces Kaido, an emperor of the sea, one of the most powerful creatures alive, and does not flinch. He scarred Kaido with a combination of Enma and his awakening conqueror's haki, then took a direct hit from Kaido's and Big Mom's combined attack to protect his allies, shattering most of the bones in his body. He does not retreat. He never retreats. The code is absolute. The virtue of Chugi, loyalty, is the one most commonly associated with Zoro. The popular narrative is that Zoro is a dog who would do anything Luffy commands. This is reductive. It strips Zoro of his agency and reduces him to a subordinate when the text repeatedly presents him as something far more complex. A partner with an independent moral compass who chooses loyalty as an act of will, not obedience. The clearest evidence for this is Water 7. After Usopp's departure and return, Luffy is ready to simply welcome him back with open arms. No consequences, no apology, no acknowledgement that what happened was wrong. Zoro refuses to accept this. He grabs Luffy by the collar and tells him plainly, "A crew with no respect, and a captain that doesn't demand it are destined to fall apart quickly." He threatens to leave the crew if Luffy allows Usopp back without an apology. This is not the behavior of a blindly obedient follower. This is a man whose loyalty is conditional on the captain being worthy of it. He has placed his honor, his pride, and his dream inside Luffy's ambition to become the Pirate King. If Luffy undermines the structure that holds the crew together, Zoro sees that as a threat to everything they've all sacrificed for. His loyalty, paradoxically, sometimes requires him to defy Luffy in order to protect what Luffy represents. And at Whiskey Peak, before any of these deeper dynamics had developed, Zoro fought Luffy with deadly intent when Luffy attacked him over a misunderstanding. He did not surrender. He did not yield because Luffy was his captain. He stood his ground because he believed he was right, and he would not allow even his captain to unjustly punish him. Loyalty for Zoro has always been a two-way street. Zoro approaches death with a defiance that borders on the mythological. This is not recklessness or stupidity. It is the bushido virtue of Meiyo, the belief that honor is more valuable than life itself. His relationship with mortality is unlike any other character in the series. He does not avoid it. He does not even particularly fear it. He simply measures every situation against a single question. Would surviving this cost me my honor? If the answer is yes, he chooses death without hesitation. At the Barity, facing Mihawk, he chooses to die facing forward, rather than live as a swordsman who ran. At Thriller Bark, he chooses to absorb a lifetime's worth of accumulated pain, rather than let his captain die. On the rooftop of Onigashima, he holds off a combined attack from two emperors with his broken body, fully accepting that those seconds might be the last of his life. But the most profound expression of this virtue is not in battle. It is in his willingness to abandon his own pride entirely when the situation demands it. During the time skip, Zoro kneels before Mihawk, the man he swore to surpass, the embodiment of the dream he has chased since childhood, and begs for training. This is, in its own way, more painful than any wound. For a man whose entire identity is built on never bowing, never retreating, the act of kneeling before his greatest rival and asking for help is a devastation of ego. But he does it because his loyalty to Luffy and the crew outweighs his personal pride. He puts his ambition second to make sure he is strong enough to protect the people who matter. That is honor in its purest form. Zoro is smart enough to know when something matters more than yourself. Beneath all the steel and discipline, the intimidating reputation, Zoro is genuinely kind. The bushido virtue of Jin, benevolence, compassion, love of humanity, is perhaps the most quietly present of all his traits, and the one that makes him a truly great character rather than merely a cool one. In Saboldi Archipelago, Zoro encounters a stranger who has collapsed on the street. Without a word, without any obligation, without even knowing who this person is, he picks them up and starts carrying them to the hospital. Other pirates mock him for it. Jewelry Bonnie is baffled, but Zoro doesn't even register it as something unusual. Of course you carry a hurt person to a hospital. That's just what you do. In Wano, when Zoro encounters Ibisu Town, a community of starving people cursed by smile fruits to laugh forever, unable to express their grief, something profound happens. Zoro is deeply unsettled, even enraged, by their condition. Not because they are laughing, but because they cannot grieve. This hits Zoro so hard, precisely because he exists in a constant state of grieving himself, carrying the weight of Queena's death, the weight of every promise. A scene where people are robbed of the ability to mourn strikes at the core of who he is. A man who carries sorrow silently so others don't have to. When the people of Ebisu offer him food from their meager rations, Zoro refuses to eat because he can see how little they have, and taking from the starving is something his conscience will not permit. He protects Hiyori and Toko without knowing they are royalty, without any expectation of reward, simply because they are in danger and he is present. He fights for Yasui's memory because Yasui showed him warmth, and Zoro repays warmth with the only currency he has, his sword. The richest aspect of Zoro as a character is the tension between his terrifying exterior and his warm interior. He is the pirate hunter. He is the king of hell. He wields cursed swords and manifests a three-headed demon aura in battle. Enemies see him and see death incarnate, but the Straw Hats see the man who naps on the deck, who gets lost walking in a straight line, who silently places himself between danger and the people he loves without ever wanting credit for it. When Zoro finally tames Enma during the fight against King, it is not through brute force alone. It is through arriving at a philosophical reconciliation. His commitment to Luffy and his commitment to Quina are not competing obligations. They are two expressions of the same principle. The samurai's refusal to abandon those he has sworn himself to. Enma demanded that Zoro stop holding back, stop compartmentalizing his power, and accept the totality of who he is. The demon and the protector, the predator and the guardian. And we see acceptance of this through this iconic scene, where Zoro dubs himself the King of Hell. That is Bushido as Oda writes it through Zoro, not a rigid code of ancient rules, but a living, breathing philosophy that bends without breaking. Zoro's relationships within the Straw Hat crew do not exist in neat, isolated boxes. They bleed into one another, overlap, contradict, and ultimately compose a single portrait of a man whose identity is inseparable from the people he has chosen to protect. What makes his crew dynamic so compelling is that every single one of them forces a different facet of his character to the surface. Facets that, without those specific people, might never have been revealed at all. At the center of everything is his bond with Luffy. This is the axis around which every other relationship rotates. Because Luffy is the reason Zoro's philosophy works at all. When Zoro was wandering the East Blue as a lone bounty hunter, his code was self-contained. Become the strongest, never retreat. Honor the promise to Quina. Then Luffy appeared, and Zoro made the single most consequential decision of his life. He subordinated his dream to someone else's. Zoro did not abandon it, he subordinated it. He told Luffy at Barity, after Mihawk had cut him open from chest to hip, that he would never lose again. And that promise was no longer just for Quina. It was for his captain. This is the relationship that defines Zoro's entire post-Barati arc. Their bond operates almost entirely without words. They do not have long conversations about feelings or the future. They barely need to communicate at all in critical moments because there is an intrinsic understanding between them that transcends speech. Luffy knows Zoro will handle what needs handling, and Zoro trusts that Luffy's instincts, however insane they appear, will lead them where they need to go. It is a relationship built not on affection, though it is there, but on mutual recognition. Luffy recognized Zoro's spirit before Zoro even understood what Luffy was, and Zoro recognized in Luffy a man worth dying for before he had any rational reason to believe it. What separates Zoro's loyalty from, say, Marco's devotion to Whitebeard, or Rayleigh's partnership with Roger is that Zoro's service is not born of hierarchy or debt. He follows Luffy because he genuinely believes Luffy deserves to be followed. The moment Luffy stops being worthy of that belief, Zoro would leave. He said as much at the very beginning. That conditional foundation is, paradoxically, what makes the loyalty so absolute. It is chosen every single day. But the brilliance of Oda's writing is that this loyalty is not blind. Water 7 proved that definitively. He threatened to leave the Straw Hats himself if Luffy did not demand an apology from Usopp before readmitting him. Think about the weight of that. The most loyal member of the crew was willing to walk away because Luffy's weakness in that moment endangered the very thing Zoro had sacrificed everything for. It was a paradox only Zoro could embody. Defying his captain to protect his captain. He was not challenging the hierarchy, he was enforcing it, because Luffy had momentarily forgotten what being captain required. Now take Sanji, and the relationship shifts entirely. I have covered this in depth in a previous video, so I will only be briefly touching on this here. Anyway, if Luffy represents the dream Zoro serves, Sanji represents the reflection Zoro refuses to look at. Their rivalry is the most misunderstood dynamic in the entire series, routinely reduced to comic relief when it is actually one of the most structurally important relationships on the crew. Oda himself has described them as brothers, not rivals. Constant bickering over who defeated the stronger opponent. All of it is surface noise. Beneath it is a bond forged in genuine respect that neither man will ever verbalize, because doing so would violate the core of who they both are. They are fundamentally two men who process their devotion to the crew through opposite methods. Chopper occupies a completely different space. Their relationship is, in many ways, the most tender one Zoro has, because it strips away every pretense of toughness without Zoro seeming to notice. Chopper idolizes Zoro in the way a child idolizes an older brother, with wide-eyed admiration, a desire to impress, and an instinct to cling to him, literally and physically, whenever fear or sadness overwhelms him. And Zoro, despite being the crew's hardest exterior, never pushes him away. During the Davy backfight, when Chopper was claimed by the Foxy Pirates and broke down in tears, Zoro did not comfort him softly. He told him to stop crying and accept the consequences of his choices, because that is how he believes men grow. It was harsh, but it was also a lesson Zoro was handing down from his own philosophy, the same philosophy Koshiro had instilled in him as a child. Nami represents a different kind of friction. Zoro has never hidden his irritation with her bossiness, her materialism, and her tendency to order the crew around like employees. But irritation and disregard are not the same thing, and Oda makes this distinction repeatedly. His first instinct when she was in danger at Arlong Park, at Alabasta, at any point in the series, was always to cut through whatever was threatening her. Their dynamic works because Nami is one of the few people who talks to Zoro like a normal person, rather than a terrifying swordsman, and Zoro tolerates it. Usopp's relationship with Zoro is defined almost entirely by the Water 7 crisis, because that is where Zoro drew his clearest moral line. Zoro does not particularly enjoy Usopp's cowardice. It grates against everything he believes about facing the world head-on. But he has also seen Usopp be genuinely brave when it matters, and that contradiction fascinates rather than disgusts him. When Usopp sacrificed himself to protect Syrup Village, declaring he would die before letting his home be destroyed, Zoro carried him without complaint. In Drum Island, when Usopp attempted to carry the massive Dalton up the mountain to match the man's bravery, Zoro quietly took over the burden. These are small moments in retrospect, but they reveal something important. Zoro does not demand that people be fearless, he demands that they try, and Usopp, for all his trembling, always tries. Now, Robin's dynamic with Zoro is arguably the most underappreciated dynamic in the entire series. He was the last Straw Hat to trust her, the only one who maintained open suspicion after she joined in Alabasta. While Luffy accepted her instantly, Sanji was blinded by attraction, and Chopper and Usopp were charmed by her devil fruit antics. Zoro kept his hand near his sword. He explicitly told the crew he did not trust her, and when her past caught up to her in Water 7, when the CP9 incident made it look like she had betrayed them, Zoro was the one who said they needed to determine whether she was friend or foe before the sun went down. He would not hesitate to cut down an enemy within the crew if it meant protecting the rest. But the moment the truth emerged, that Robin had sacrificed herself to save them, not betray them, Zoro's suspicion evaporated completely. He gave everything he had at Amy's lobby to free her, and their relationship transformed into one of the most quietly profound bonds on the crew. After that arc, they share a seriousness that the rest of the crew lacks, a mutual understanding of what it means to carry darkness within yourself and still choose to live for others. Frankie's acceptance into the crew followed a rocky beginning. The Frankie family's assault on Usopp meant Zoro held a grudge longer than most. But once Frankie proved his loyalty during Ani's lobby, and later poured his soul into building the Thousand Sunny as a tribute to the Going Merry's legacy, Zoro's respect was earned in full. Jinbei brings a dynamic Zoro has never had before. A peer. Not a rival like Sanji, not a dependent like Chopper, not an authority like Luffy. A genuine equal in terms of combat experience, moral weight, and philosophical seriousness. Jinbei's time with the Sun Pirates, his service as a warlord, and his willingness to defy the world government for what he believes in, mirrors Zoro's own code in many respects. Jinbei does not compete with Zoro, and Zoro does not posture against Jinbei, which is itself remarkable given how competitive Zoro can be. There is a quiet mutual recognition between them. Each crewmate draws out a different version of him. The loyal warrior for Luffy, the prideful brother for Sanji, the gentle protector for Chopper, the reluctant enforcer for Usopp, the kindred spirit for Robin. No single dynamic tells the full story. It is only when viewed together that the real Zoro becomes visible. And the Straw Hats in all their chaos and heart are the whetstones against which Zoro has shaped himself into the swordsman he swore to become. Every member of Luffy's crew has a dream. Nami wants to map the world. Sanji wants to find the All Blue. Chopper wants to cure every disease. But Zoro is the only one whose dream is fundamentally combative. He must fight and defeat the strongest person in his field. This means that, more than anyone else on the crew, Zoro's ambition puts him in direct conflict with the world. The world's greatest swordsman title is hollow if the people Zoro's blades protect are dead. The king of the pirates' crown is meaningless if Luffy sits on it alone. Zoro understood this at Thriller Bark when he put his life and dream on the floor and said, "Take me instead." He understood it in Wano when he stopped fighting Enma and let it consume his haki, trusting that his will was strong enough to survive. He understands it every single time. Zoro is the embodiment that loyalty is not weakness, that serving someone you believe in is not subservience, that carrying another person's dream, a dead girl's dream, a rubber boy's dream, is a privilege.